You are listening to Travel to Tomorrow, a podcast on the future of travel and tourism.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Travel to Tomorrow. This is your host, Mario Hardy from the Pacific Asia Travel Association. And today my guest is Rochelle, who's the head of research and insight at a company called MaCher, a sustainable design firm, a B Corp, and a signatory of the participant in the United Nations Global Impact. Rochelle, it's a great pleasure to have you with us today. And please tell us a little bit more about yourself and your experience and your interest in specifically around sustainability at the moment.
Thanks, Mario. It's an absolute honor to have been asked to be on this podcast, so thank you very much. So I've worked a lot in travel and tourism over the last few years. My career has taken me largely in research, actually, and understanding consumer behavior and what makes people do the things that they do, and how we can, as businesses, nudge people in the right direction to act in a way that makes better choices for the environment or for social behaviors, for communities and for people. So I did that for companies. One of the big travel and tourism companies I worked for was TUI. I was there for a number of years, then worked for the UK's Consumers Association and sort of fought for the rights of travelers and what companies should be doing in order to protect consumer rights in travel. And then moved to the World Travel and Tourism Council, where I headed up research and more laterally research and sustainability. And again, looking at the policies and actions that businesses as well as governments could take on sustainability and sustainable action. I was really then very, very interested in the B Corp movement, and then in January this year left the WTTC and joined MaCher, as you said. So MaCher is a sustainable design firm, and we make promotional products. But our goal is never to sell as many pieces to as many companies as possible. Our view is that promotional products, when they are made for the right reasons, in the right way, and in the right manner, can be part of a solution to help a company. And that might be to help a company get rid of plastic, for example. We did a lot of work with some companies that were using plastic water bottles, and we came in and created the refillable water bottles and worked with a company that provided the water so that the bottles could be refilled. And we managed to get rid of over 56 million water bottles, plastic water bottles in that example. We believe that if you're going to give products to customers, and we have the research to show the reasons, reputational or financial, for doing so, but you need to start with the why rather than the what. And our mission is really to understand these customers and suggest ways that we can create these products and do so in a sustainable way.
I remember actually when you shared publicly that you were actually leaving WTTC to move to MaCher, you had indicated that actually one of the reasons you actually joined this organization was because of the fact of their focus on sustainable practices. And you've mentioned B Corp or certified B Corp organizations. For those who may not be familiar with the terminology, can you explain to us what B Corp stand for?
Sure. So the B Corp community is a certification that about 3,500 companies around the world now have. And it's a kind of business that balances purpose and profit. And so it's a legal obligation for companies to consider the impact of their decisions on their workers, on their customers, on their suppliers, on the community, and on the environment. So they have to, in all the business decisions that they do, they have to take in the concerns of all stakeholders. And so it's a global movement of business being a force for good. And there's some really amazing examples of B Corps out there, some big ones like Patagonia, the outerwear company, Intrepid as a travel and tourism company, the adventure travel and tourism company, they are a B Corp. Ben & Jerry's, the ice cream company. They are a B Corp. And Danone, which is a yogurt and a milk company, they've just recently certified as a B Corp as well. So every month there are about 50 new companies perhaps around the world that are certifying, and this movement is growing around purpose of business and how and where business can really make a difference.
Can you give us an example of some of the criteria to be part of B Corp? Is it not only based on sustainable manufacturing of products, but also possibly on ethical way of manufacturing and distributing and et cetera? Is there any other examples you can give us?
Yeah, sure. So there are, there's a big questionnaire, and actually any business can go on without charge to the B Corp website and try and fill in the questionnaire. And it doesn't make any commitment to doing anything. It just helps guide direction. So it'll talk about people, for example, the people in your organization, and it'll ask, how much people are paid and what is the rate of pay of the lowest worker compared to the rate of pay of the highest worker, and ask you to put that information into the computer. It will ask for how people are recognized and rewarded for the work that they do. They will ask about how discipline happens. They will ask about how people are recruited and whether you're recruiting people in a way that brings about equity and diversity within the workplace. They'll ask, for example, about how many women sit on the board, or people of color, do they sit on the board? So things like that from a people perspective. From a supply chain perspective, they'll ask about how you vet your supply chain, how you make sure that your supply chain partners are fulfilling their responsibilities according to the laws and regulations in the countries that they operate, but also what they are producing meets certain standards. So if you're making products, for example, are those products made with the best environmental stringency, or are they using chemicals, for example, that shouldn't be used in certain countries of the world? From an environmental perspective, they ask about your waste, your water, your electricity, where you get your electricity from, the proportion of your electricity that is renewable, and all of these questions. And you go through and you get more points, obviously, if you answer in a certain direction, but also that it helps guide you, and it helps you to understand why you might not be getting more points, and how when you redo the certification, because every B Corp company has to be recertified every 3 years, you might want to improve your score the following year by making some perhaps small or perhaps large changes in your business to become a bit more ethical, or more aware of the communities that you're working in, or be better as a supplier, or work better with the people that are in your company.
I believe recently you've also actually completed or joined another program called Climate Reality Leaders Corps. But before we go and talk about that program, I'm curious to know, is your interest and passion for sustainability and ethical development, manufacturing, etc., is this something that was new to you, or is this something you've always had an interest since you were very, very young?
That's a really good question. And it's actually a question that when I joined the Climate Reality Leadership Corps, it's one that we were asked ourselves. So where did this interest or passion in sustainability and in climate action, where did it come from? And I had to think sort of really long and hard, because it in my mind is something that's always just been innate in me. And I think I have to put it back to my mum. So I grew up in Canada, but my mother grew up in England after, or just at the end of the war. And they were very, very poor, and so poor that it hurts her to talk about it now. And because they were so poor, they valued everything, and they knew the value on everything. And so, they would wash out tinfoil, and they would, make sure that absolutely no scraps were wasted in the food that they ate. They would darn all the clothes that had holes in them. They would use hand-me-downs and support each other and the family and all the relatives that they had with hand-me-downs of shoes, and saving bath water. I mean, all of these things were incredible in terms of what they went through. But moving to Canada later, she had a very nice life in Canada, but still, I think, instilled in us this need to respect, I think, the things that we had, to know where these things came from, to know the value of what it took to either produce them or to waste them. And it's just how I grew up. And I think that was important to me. And also, I think when I was a very, probably someone who was able to be changed in my early teens, I came to the UK, and all on the news was about the famine in Ethiopia at the time. And it was, the time of Live Aid and raising money. And these were pictures that I don't remember. Maybe it was because I didn't watch very much television or television news in Canada, but they weren't pictures on the news that I saw very often in Canada. And they were very much front and center when I was visiting my family in the UK. And, I learned so much about inequality, unfairness, and the need really for, for me to think, I think, more widely about my relative position in the world, and where I, and how I could perhaps make a difference.
Does your, now I've got to ask the question that I'm sure other people are probably wondering. When you go do your grocery, when you go shopping, do you look at the labels? Do you actually question where they were actually manufactured, or do you pay attention to those?
Absolutely. I have to, and I feel really guilty. And my children, actually, I think they're fed up with me because I won't buy things if it has a lot of plastic on it, or if it has come from too far away when there's a local alternative. And, I think, find myself spending too much time perhaps going around the grocery shopping, and really wish there were symbols, or it was far easier to make those decisions. And as a consumer, I think that there are real opportunities for companies out there to address that kind of product to people like me, where you can just quickly go into a grocery store and find the products that are really easy, that that they are sustainably made, or that they are ethically sourced, or that they are actually bringing regenerative practices into the way that they are being made. I get a grocery delivery from a B Corp, actually, and it's all sort of local farmer food, and I tend to shop that way, which, yes, it is more expensive, and yes, I am very fortunate to be able to pay a little bit more, but I'm prepared to do that, because I think these costs at some point have to be built in, and that's just the way I think.
Yeah, I've started to do the same thing too over the last, say, probably the last 2 years. I've been paying more attention to it, probably because actually we've I don't know if they were there before and I just didn't know, or just because there's more marketing, or there's more noise done about it. But I found it in a multitude of stores around where we live in Bangkok that offers you the ability to go and just fill up your bottles with, you bring your own bottles, and you can fill up with shampoo and conditioners and the stuff that, or products to clean the house, and things that we use on a regular basis, that it would be very convenient and easy just to go to the local market and supermarket and buy it. But it's, if I just walk 100 more meter or a little bit longer, there's this other shop available where I can just fill it up, and I've got all these empty other bottles that are sitting at home, and instead of throwing them away, keep them and go and fill them up.
Yeah, and there's a
And
real movement towards that, and it's so wonderful to see. I think my children call me I'm natural mummy, and so all the kids' friends tease me because everything has to be natural, and I'm not quite hardcore. I don't. We still live in a house that produces electricity and energy. So, I'm not living in a tent in the garden, but, they are, they do tease me about how far I will go to purchase or not purchase things because of how they are made.
well, good. As I mentioned before, you've recently actually joined and completed a program called Climate Reality Leaders Corps. And can you tell us a little bit more about this program and what made you decide to join it?
Sure. So the Climate Reality Leader Corp is a climate change movement fronted by the former U.S. Vice President, Al Gore. And the aim is to get almost like an army of people educated on the issues around climate change for us to go and take action in our communities and other spheres of influence so that others can understand how urgent this issue is of climate change and why and where there is that need for change. So it might be in encouraging us to write letters to government officials or ask our companies that we work for about our pension investments. We give presentations or write blogs. And that hopefully challenging and asking questions even more and more will help to move us away from this traditional sort of the linear, we take something, we make something with it, we waste it, that framework, and build a better future. So I think around the world there are about 30,000 people that have gone through the program. And many of the people were people who are already very heavily involved in shaping local policy and championing engagement by business. And others were, people just like me, people who feel that I haven't been doing enough. This is something that's really important to me, but I just needed to do a bit more and feel that change is needed. So, there's nonprofits and social enterprises and organizations of community groups and policy writers and there's some really impressive people who are all really trying to just bring up this issue of climate urgency that needs to be heard, I think, more by business and by government so that change can actually take place far quicker than it probably is at the moment.
I know you've touched on it a little bit briefly, but what are some of the skill sets you've actually learned from actually having joined this program?
Well, Mr. Gore's presentation is structured around three critical questions around must we change, can we change, and will we change? And so I've learned a lot about the science. There's words out there like megafire and rain bomb that I wasn't even aware of before, that these mega fires are the kinds of things that we're seeing happening in California, and the rain bomb is similar of the impact that we just had in France, where whole villages are just completely wiped out by a significant amount of rain in a very short period of time. That we never used to have these kinds of words before because we'd never had these kinds of climate impacts. And I learned a lot about climate justice and about how the biggest impacts of climate change are affecting those who are most vulnerable, and pollution and economic dependence and lack of respect for culture and human rights are huge in this area. The group, they gave us training on how to give the presentation, how to write letters, how to engage in activism and how to form communities and networks. We still have a WhatsApp group with a small group of the people that I trained with. There are about 20 of us that are on a WhatsApp group. We have regular meetups online. We have webinars where we learn and discuss skills on how to advocate and how to give good presentations and how to win over audiences. It's a training that's open for everyone all around the world. There was no charge for it other than they want people to go out and share this news on a regular basis throughout the year. So I think it was something that really sort of woke me up to a lot more information about the scale of the problem than I knew before.
Yeah, I went to the website and actually read about find it really fascinating and interesting. And when I have a little bit more time after my current position, maybe I'll go in and join in too, because I found it quite interesting. There was there was actually a comment there actually on a website where they were talking about the difference between climate change and global warming. And could you elaborate maybe a little bit more on that, and maybe something you've learned through the program, the difference between the two and the importance of both?
Sure. So the words are often used interchangeably. So someone might talk about global warming when we're actually now talking about climate change, or wondering why do we say climate change when I used to say global warming. But global warming is about the Earth's temperature rising, and that's rising either on the surface or deep in the oceans. And we know that since about the 1950s, the temperature on Earth has risen about 1 degree Celsius. And that's been brought about by the burning of fossil fuels and the heating of those gases from being trapped in the atmosphere. When we had the Paris Climate Change Agreement, we talk about, well, initially in 2015, we talked about temperatures not rising more than 2 degrees, and now we say 1.5 degrees. So that's where we're referring to about how temperatures need to stay below what they were in before the 1950s. Climate change includes global warming, but it's also other things that are occurring, or the side effects of that global warming. So climate change will include things like melting glaciers, or these heavier rainstorms, or shifts in the time that flowers bloom, or the more frequent drought that is happening in other places of the world. So climate change is the bigger, all-encompassing word, which incorporates global warming within that.
Yeah, a few years ago, we were very privileged and fortunate to have a young lady by the name of Katie Gentile Kirchner, a poet from the Marshall Islands, who spoke at one of our events, and later made everyone cry in the room, which was our measure of success of our participation, because essentially she was sharing how climate change and global warming is affecting her country or nation, the Marshall Islands, which are slowly and gradually disappearing. And she told this story in a way that she wrote a poem telling the story to her young son about daughter, about the future of her country, which is essentially disappearing, that he or she may not have an island to live on. And then we've seen, as you travel around the world, you see the impact on many other destinations in Bangladesh and other places around the world who are severely impacted with these changes. And you can't just see this and not be affected by it and stop thinking about, what can I do about it? What do we have a fighting chance to stop climate change, or are all the efforts we're putting forward is only going to slow it down? And I don't know if this is something that you've touched upon during your program, but it is something that I'm sure many people are asking themselves.
Well, I mean, it's very worrying. And I mean, you give the example of the Marshall Islands, and, one of the other countries very near to that, Vanuatu, has already purchased land in another country, in Fiji, because it knows that when the sea levels rise, there will be no country of Vanuatu left for the people to live on. So it is already planning the mass migration of its people to another place because of climate and climate causing that. But, even if we stopped emitting greenhouse gases today, we know that the warming of the atmosphere would continue to happen for at least several more decades. And that's because it takes a while for the planet to respond. And so much of the heat is stored in the oceans. And carbon dioxide, which is the main gas that traps heat, lingers in the atmosphere for about 100 years. And so there's a time lag between what we do, and if we were to do that today, and when we would start to really feel it. And so the answer is clearly not to do nothing, but to do a few things. One is to start immediately cutting our emissions. And we know that without major action, the temperature is on track to rise, perhaps up by 6 degrees centigrade. And those latest estimates are just crazy in comparison to where we need to be. We also have to work really hard to remove carbon from the atmosphere, and can do that by planting lots and lots and lots of trees. But also, there's some really interesting technology around carbon sequestration, which is actually almost vacuuming carbon out of the air and sucking it out of the air and then storing it underground. It's a very expensive and quite niche technology at the moment, but all of these things start niche and start small, and there's an opportunity for that to really catch on as more investment becomes available for that. And I think
Actually,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say third, as these lands warm, as we know we are going to have more storms, as we know that we have greater flooding and more droughts and more concerns that are just hitting us from a climate perspective, we're going to have to learn how to deal with it better, and adapt our buildings and adapt our agriculture and adapt our behaviors around fighting climate change.
Yeah, I was just about to ask you, because you've mentioned about some of the solutions, and we often talk about stopping extraction and usage of fossil fuel as one of the key elements. But besides this, what are the other key actions that can be taken that can make a significant difference in reduction of CO2 emission?
Well, stopping fossil fuels is absolutely fundamental, but there's really, really good news about renewables, and particularly I think in countries that where they don't necessarily need to go through the sort of the linear pattern that we've all gone through in other countries, where they can immediately go to solar, for example. And we're seeing some tremendous examples in places like India and Chile of the amount of solar electricity that is being generated in those countries, and the investment for solar in those countries is absolutely phenomenal. And one of the big reasons for that investment is that not only is the cost of the batteries going down incredibly, but the performance of those batteries is also increasing significantly. And so it is becoming far cheaper to use renewables in many, many places in the world rather than coal or gas or oil, and therefore the investment is happening in those renewables and energy sources that are not going to pollute our atmosphere. So we can also do things like we can limit our consumption of plastic, which comes from petroleum, and there's huge efforts that need to happen around removing plastics. We can plant trees, as I mentioned before, and masses of numbers of trees I know are being planted across Africa, but in other places of the world. And I think the World Economic Forum and others got together last year to say that they were going to plant 1 trillion trees. So, I'd love to see a lot of that start happening now, and greater tree planting. We can continue this carbon sequestration. And of course, I think we have to do better about educating ourselves on the issues and ask ourselves the tough questions of governments and of companies, of where we purchase what we purchase. And if we don't like the answer to that, then we have to ask for change. And I think there's an onus on us to start being, say, more aware of where those changes need to happen.
Yeah, very, very good. I mean, like you talked about South America or Central America. Costa Rica is actually one country that I'm in great admiration for having, giving up their military and focusing actually all the funding into education and renewable energy in a very, very successful manner. So, to me, they're one of others, but many leading examples of how to actually become a more sustainable, more responsible country or destinations.
I think it's happening elsewhere as well. I mean, China has just announced it was going to be climate zero before 2060. So, I mean, it's still a long way off. But, if you're saying you're going to be climate zero before 2060, that means you're taking significant steps right now to get to that phase. And we know that China is one of the biggest polluters at the moment. So for them to have come out and make that statement, I think is quite a significant step in the right direction. Similarly, the European Commission is going to be climate neutral by 2050. And they want to cut greenhouse gas emissions by 55% by 2030. So, over the next few years, we are going to see some really significant action, I think, around the world in this area.
Excellent. Well, as we're getting to the close of our session, I do want to touch upon tourism a little bit. Obviously, we're with both yours and my background in this sector. Currently, for me, working in this sector at the moment, um, and ask you about, do you think tourism can play a role in mitigating climate change? Have you seen organizations taking actions in that direction?
I think it has to. I spent years at the World Travel and Tourism Council, calculating the economic contribution of tourism to the countries of the world, and it was over 10%, 10.3% of tourism GDP comes from of global GDP, comes from tourism. But we also know that the footprint, the climate footprint of tourism is about 8% of global emissions. And so we're almost getting to a balance where, tourism is making a significant contribution, both in GDP, but also in emissions. And so something needs to happen. I think, you've spoken about the Marshall Islands, and I mentioned Vanuatu. Both of those countries are very heavily dependent on tourism at the moment. And there are lots of small island development states where the GDP of the country is primarily from travel and tourism. And so if those countries are not able to sustain economies, then that means that their livelihoods, their schools, their opportunities for the people that live there is just going to flounder. And we can't have that. I think I had a great opportunity to work with some really clever scientists from the Nature Conservancy a few years ago, and they were helping the countries in the Caribbean that were battered by the hurricanes that had absolutely devastated the islands. And the people that had been coming in to say, right, let's just rebuild this hotel exactly where it was before, because it was lovely before, it had a beautiful view of the ocean, and let's rebuild it. And the people from the Nature Conservancy were saying, no, wait a minute. Let's look at the wave patterns. Let's look at the wave energy. Let's plant a heck of a lot of mangroves along the coastal area to help control that wave energy. Let's move the plans for the building that you're going to rebuild just slightly, a few meters in one direction or another, to make it much, much more resilient, to make the land more resilient, to make the waves and the wave energy being controlled a bit as much as possible by the mangroves, by nature. And I think, tourism really needs to take advantage of the knowledge of these experts who understand nature. And so much of tourism, because it is, relies on this beautiful vistas and the sand and the sea, we can use nature in the right way to do that. From a city perspective, I think one of the benefits of COVID is that people haven't been out and about in the cities as much. And so a lot of cities around the world have said, right, we're going to stop cars from going into these areas, and we're going to allow them to be pedestrianized or to have more bicycle lanes. And if you take the cars out, then you make the air cleaner, and you also make that place a bit more attractive. And so as a tourism destination, it becomes more attractive. So you need the nature, you need the policies of government, and you need the will of the people to push all of this in the right direction. And tourism can really help, I think, because people go to places because they're beautiful, and if we can make them more beautiful and longer lasting and more resilient, then I think that is tourism's role in mitigating climate change.
In your opinion, which are the brands in tourism who are leading the way in sustainability at the moment? Is there any particular brand that comes to your mind?
Well, I mentioned one earlier, and I think I'll mention them again. So it's Intrepid, who, like MaCher, my company, is a B Corp. And so they have this legal obligation, as I mentioned, to maximize benefit for all their stakeholders. They've been carbon neutral since 2010, and they operate very, very much for purpose. And one of the things that all companies need to do is really start measuring that how much their emissions are, where those emissions come from, and how and where they can cut them to reduce its impact. And Intrepid has been doing a lot of this measurement for a long time, and actually integrate their financial results with the sustainability, to provide this sort of transparency of, yes, okay, we may have earned money, but actually this is what we've done in order to earn that money. It's cost us more energy, or it's cost us more water, or actually perhaps it hasn't, and this is the outcome of that. And I think having that real open and transparent approach to what is driving businesses is going to be really important for the way forward. And I think one of the things I really like about them is that, you know, this is, they've opened up this isn't something that they think is as, you know, competitive and they need to hide, that they've opened up their approach to help other businesses do this, and so they're willing to share their knowledge and expertise in this area so that everybody can win in the end.
Who is your sustainability hero? Regardless if it's a company, a politician, an individual, or your daughter, or someone in your family, who's the person you're, you know, really thinking that this is the person that is really leading the way in terms of sustainability that you admire?
Well, I've got two actually. One is someone who is slightly more removed. So it's so in all of the world, everyone knows the BBC's David Attenborough. But growing up in Canada, I didn't. And I knew the Canadian equivalent, who was a man called Dr. David Suzuki, and he was a Canadian biologist. And he used to be on the television talking people about the importance of nature and environment and the wisdom within the Indigenous communities, which I think is also something that often gets forgotten or just sort of ignored, really. And he really emphasized how important it was to listen to the elders and listen to the people that knew the land in order to understand how to manage it for the future. And he continues this with a foundation that focuses on climate and biodiversity and environmental rights. And he's someone I really have as a sustainability hero, because I think he was one of the ones that really started getting me thinking of this way in a long time ago. And I think more recently, I met this man who won an award at the WTTC, one of the Tourism for Tomorrow awards, and he runs a company called GHE, and his name is Paris Lumba, from India, and he's an engineer by trade, but through his company, he takes people on tours of the Himalayas, but he does so, and he brings with the people solar energy, and then teaches people in the villages how to repair and replace the solar energy panels. And so he has almost single-handedly, through his company, gone into so many tiny remote villages in the Himalayas and brought light, actually really electrified and brought light to these communities that had absolutely nothing before, all on the back of solar. And I think, you know, for someone, an individual, to have made such a significant change is someone I do have as a hero, and I really admire someone like that. So I'm very, very pleased to have known, and I consider Paris a really good friend now. So so I think I've got two, if I may.
Very good. Well, actually, David Suzuki I've met when we were studying at university in Toronto. I'm also Canadian, a long time ago. And apparently, before I joined this organization, he also one of the keynote speaker at a PATA event very, very long time ago as well. And someone I was also, as you did, was watching on TV when I grew up, and I was always fascinated by what he had to share. And Paris, I got to know to similar network at the World Tourism Forum, Lucerne programs and other activities. We've actually met several times. I am also in great admiration of what he and his team have been doing with the GHE program, which is absolutely remarkable. So I would definitely support that as well. So
excellent.
Two very, very good choices, and I'm sure he'll be pleased that we mentioned him today. My last question for you, which is not related to today's topic, or not directly related to it, but more about, you know, after this current situation of pandemic and COVID-19, which has actually grounded most of us for an extensive period of time, we all have a desire to travel. So my question to you is, where do you and your family want to travel when this is all over, when we're all allowed to roam around as freely as we used to be?
Well, there's so much of the world that I still want to see, but also places that I have a real hankering to go back to. I lived a long time in Japan. I would just desperate to go back to Japan. And at the moment, the fall leaves will be stunning, and you know, that's a place that I just really want to go and just, you know, walk with nature. It was this summer we were supposed to be in Canada. It was my father's 80th birthday, and we were going to have a big family celebration, and, you know, as well take ourselves off, and we had booked this kayaking trip to kayak with the orcas, and, you know, of course all of that got cancelled, and I've not been able to see my family, my parents, for, you know, a good period of time now. So I think if I could just choose one place, I'd probably go back and say hello to my parents and wish my father a happy 80th birthday.
Well, good, Rochelle Turner. It's been a great pleasure to have you on the show today, and I wish you and your family well for the future. And I certainly hope that all together we can certainly improve on our sustainability practices moving forward, and make sure we live in a much better world in the future. So once again, thank you very much. And for our listeners, this was the last of this series of Travel to Tomorrow. But don't worry, we'll be back next month with a new series. So thank you very much for listening today. Goodbye.